we would really only do for this class, since we're designing them to be, I don't want to get into foo strategies terribly, but Extra Credits has a really great episode on FOOS, FOOS, which stands for First Order Optimal Strategies. Basically, what a foo strategy is something that allows for a new player to compete with better players in a game. And this is that class. We're trying to make a class in which most of the mechanics are easier and you have more resources than the other classes do. Hopefully, it won't be imbalanced. We've done our best to make sure of that, but uh, that's something that we're aware of. That might be an issue. So, Destrier is the passive that Rallycara starts with. Whenever Rallycara is summoned, she gains 2 stacks of dash. She may consume a stack of dash as a free active whenever she moves to attack an enemy on the front row as though they were within her range. So if you have the Cavalier and you're moving around with your mobility charge frequently, then Raleigh gets to make free attacks as you're moving between rows. And the reason that we did that was because Raleigh has melee range. We didn't want her to lose out on attacks when you have a movement based mount like a horse. It didn't make a lot of sense. And technically, Raleigh is a unicorn, um, but it's she's not a cute unicorn, so if you're worried about that. Then
She's a hardened, badass unicorn
yeah,
of getting shit done.
yeah. I wanna show you guys the disorder that we're basing her on. Basically, the unicorns fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva is the disorder that we're basing our unicorns around. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but it's a disease that causes your muscles and ligaments to not calcify but ossify to become bone. And so our unicorns go through that process, and eventually they die. They can no longer move. They're trapped inside their own skeletons. So that's one of your mounts. Um, so then we have Bolfus, who's this big, fluffy, like Appa looking ox mammoth thing. Very cute. And in fact, if you go and you look at our Twitch banner, that's what we have in our Twitch banner is Bolfus. Something of a mascot for us. Very cute. He's the tank class or the tank subclass of the Cavalier. For 10 mana, basic speed, Bolfus becomes the target of all abilities that deal damage, which would target only the Cavalier until the end of your next turn. Um, so that's for both this turn and until the end of the next one, which makes it hard to target the Cavalier when Bolfus is out. But if your mount dies, they die for the rest of battle. So it is sort of a trade-off. If no abilities target the Cavalier during this duration, the next cast of Obeisance raises Bolfus's max HP by 5. So he has a way of kind of pumping his max HP up, which works with his second ability, Slumberer, in which Bolfus regenerates 3 HP each turn when he is not the active summon. So if he's switched out and he took a lot of damage, sort of like in a fighting game, like Marvel vs. Capcom, where you tap in people, he'll be gaining his health back. And then when he comes back into play, when you switch him back in, he restores 2 HP to the Cavalier for every 3 HP that he regenerated. So it's a nice little heal for the Cavalier. Pretty uplifting. Oh, yeah. Um, Garcil is the mage mount, and he's got this ability called Blackling Bomb, which lets him set enemies ablaze, which is a pretty devious thing to do, but I guess it makes sense for a dragon. And basically, the ability does more damage based on how many blaze stacks they have. Um, and it also, if the enemy would move away from it or kind of get out of the way of it, it splits into a shotgun blast kind of and hits the front row of enemies. And his passive allows him to attack from range, more or less, uh, and do a little bit more damage if he's attacking people who have blaze currently. And that's all of the mounts when you get them. The balancing factor, even though you're gaining 6 abilities at rank 3, is that you can only use 2 of them at any given time. And when you first get this ability, you can't even switch between mounts. So really, you're gaining 2 abilities at rank 3, and those 2 abilities change depending on the encounter that you're in, depending on which mount you select at the beginning of combat, or which of your mounts dies, and then you'll have more access to different abilities. So that's those are the mounts for now. Um, we might only get through Cavalier today for explaining all the classes. I'm sorry if we failed you at each straw poll. Um, did you have anything you want to add to that?
I mean, like I said, but at this point, if anyone has any questions on what's been explained, it'd be a really good time to ask.
That's a good point. And it'll also give me time to eat this amazing food.
So we'll just take a few minutes if anyone has any questions on anything to answer them.
Yeah, I'm gonna take a minute, like eat this delicious food break, wet my whistle, and then continue. Um, turkey sandwich. Mm. Oh, and for anyone who's just tuning in, or if you've been doing something more important, which I completely understand, you'll be able to see this in a highlight later. So just check that out. It's posted. It should probably be a little. Well, as much as I've enjoyed eating, I think for the sake of this highlight, probably time to get back to it. As always, if you guys have any questions, just feel free to ask them as we're running through. All right, so the rank 4, as I mentioned earlier, it's an active, so it doesn't interfere with your ability to attack, which is important for DPSs. Um, and for those unfamiliar with that term, I think most would be, but maybe you're coming from just a squid chips. Yeah, sorry if I was smacking my lips or anything. Just trying not to. I was eating veggie straws, turkey sandwich. Um, what was I saying? I don't remember what I was saying. This is terrible.
You don't remember where you were?
Mm-mm. I remember I was at rank 4, but I don't remember what I was saying by rank 4. Remember I said, as I was saying earlier, blank, 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 and then I was talking about, oh, DPS, right. So,
There you go.
for those of you from a non-RPG background, DPS stands for damage per second. The term has come to encapsulate certain types of characters as well. Like a barbarian would generally be a DPS in a game because their main goal in combat is dealing damage per second or more damage per second than other characters. And technically, since we're in a turn-based system, DPS doesn't really um, factor in. Really, I guess you could, but it'd be more like damage per minute. Uh, it's more of like an ARPG, an action RPG, or MMO sort of term. And I think everyone knows what MMOs are now, even the people at Fox News. Uh, so what EchoScent is doing is it allows you to unsummon your active mount and summon another mount in to replace it. And if you're looking at the abilities earlier, The passives generally for those mounts gave you some sort of benefit for switching the mounts in and out. Um, so this allows for more of that sort of comboing mounts playstyle, or kind of switching in Pokemon and switching them out playstyle. That's what we're trying to allude to. Um, Rank 5 is Realm Guard. It's a passive. It's if you think of the mounts on rank 3 Animus as being the primary ability, and you think of movement as being the tertiary or mechanic rather of the class, then the secondary mechanic of the class is objective charges. And all of this text is a lot more complicated than it needs to be. Basically, the first enemy that you attack gains an objective charge, um, which is important to the Cavalier's character, but uh, that's something that I think we can go into like in another stream. We don't have to get into like the history of characters. I think maybe a little bit, but our lead writer's here in the chat, so if you have questions about that, feel free to ask them. Yeah. Uh, Basically, what this objective charge lets you do is focus on one enemy and prioritize them. And if you stop targeting that enemy, then your objective charge goes away. Ralikara lets you circumvent that a little bit. She can help you to switch objective charges to other enemies, but only when you have her out. So if you favor other mounts, that'll be something that's not really a part of your tool. Um, so as for the effects of this charge, anytime you attack that enemy, and there are some restrictions may apply, but anytime you attack an enemy, you build up a rank or a tier on that charge until you get to rank 3, and then it can't go any higher. But on the first tier, your attacks deal every type of melee damage to the objective target, and the attacks can't be moved away from. So if you're up against another Cavalier and they try and use a mobility charge, it won't work against you. And then your attacks deal every type of melee damage. There are a couple different types of melee damage, like slashing, crushing, uh, some others like that. And some armors might have resistances to those damage, so your attacks won't be able to be resisted by enemies. It doesn't change the amount of damage you do, it just changes what type you're doing or dealing. Rank 2 lets you, or Tier 2 of the objective charge, lets you make a counterattack against the enemy who has an objective charge if they go in to attack you. So it disincentivizes them attacking you back. And then rank 3 gives you lifesteal from whomever you put an objective charge on. And I think we can go on to rank 6. Rank 6 is a Veil, which lets you transfer HP to your mount so that they don't die. And then if that same mount is still out at the beginning of your next turn, um, and they didn't die, so, okay. Basically, if you don't die in that time, you get the HP back. And then at the beginning of your turn, that mount is still out. They didn't die. Then you can switch them with another mount for free. Um, and as a free active. So that's really nice because it doesn't take up your active for the combat cycle. Rank 7 is upgrading all of your mounts. So let's go back to the bestiary and look at even more abilities. Um, so Rallycar's first ability at rank 7 is Pinion, and these abilities are added to the pre-existing abilities. They don't overwrite them. Pinion's 15 mana, it's a basic. Rallycar gains Fly 1. And it's not immediately clear what flying is going to do yet, but I'm assuming it'll make you immune to AoEs, or certain AoEs. And it might be difficult to hit you with directed terrain-based effects, or terrain might not have any effect on you. She gains flying, she gets +1 range, and she can't be avoided by moving, which kind of hoses other Cavaliers against you. but I think that's good. Cavalier is the Cavalier killer.